Maya Rodriguez blended into the beige walls of the Pine Grove Memorial Hospital night shift. To her colleagues, she was a quiet, exceptionally competent nurse in her late 30s, with calm hands and a reassuring smile. She kept to herself, her past a polite mystery. She'd mention sometime in the service, if asked, but quickly changed the subject to a patient's chart. Her life was a carefully constructed routine of shifts, gym sessions, and solitude in her small apartment. The most excitement she allowed herself was the tactical precision of her morning coffee brewing. The cardiac ward was quiet, the only sounds the soft beeping of monitors and the distant hum of the HVAC system. Maya was finishing notes at the central station when a muffled pop from the lobby, unmistakable to her trained ears, shattered the calm. It wasn't a medical machine failing, it was a gunshot. A second later, the hospital's PA system crackled with a strained, terrified voice. Code Silver, main lobby. All staff, secure your units. Panic, thin and sharp, rippled through the nurses. Dr. Evans froze, his pen hovering over a chart. But Maya's entire being shifted. The gentle slouch in her shoulders snapped into a rigid, alert posture. Her eyes, usually warm and tired, swept the corridor with a cold, analytical focus. The comforting clutter of the nurses' station became a potential field of cover and obstacles. The beeping monitors were now auditory threats, masking the sound of approaching footsteps. Lock the medication cabinet. Get every patient who can move into their bathrooms. Turn off the lights, she said, her voice low and devoid of its usual softness. It was a command, not a suggestion. The head nurse, Brenda, stared at her. Maya, what are you? Do it. Now. Maya moved to the heavy fire door separating the ward from the main corridor. She engaged the lock. Then, her eyes fell on a stainless steel four-pole. With a swift, practiced motion, she detached the base, hefting the solid pole like a baton. It was no M4, but it was better than nothing. She positioned herself to the side of the door's narrow window. In the shadow, her breathing slow and controlled. The frightened nurses followed her orders, herding confused patients in a hushed, urgent scramble. The ward plunged into an eerie semi-darkness, illuminated only by the ghostly glow of exit signs and monitor screens. Downstairs, the chaos was escalating. A man, desperate and high on something, had shot a security guard in the leg and was now screaming for morphine, waving a cheap pistol. He'd taken 2 orderlies and a receptionist hostage in a storage room off the main hallway. The police had surrounded the building, but negotiations were going nowhere. The intruder, named Leo, was paranoid, volatile, and running out of time. In a final, frantic decision, he dragged one of the orderlies with him as a human shield and started moving, demanding to be taken to a surgical unit where he believed the strong drugs were kept. The elevator dinged on the cardiac floor. The door slid open to reveal Leo, wild-eyed, pressing his gun to the temple of a sobbing young orderly. He stumbled into the darkened corridor, confused by the lack of staff. Hello, I need a doctor. I'll blow his head off, he screamed, his voice echoing. From her concealed position, Maya assessed him in milliseconds. Shaky stance, poor grip on the weapon, emotional, high. A threat, but an unstable one. Her military training, buried for over a decade, surfaced with icy clarity. He began moving down the hall, shoving the orderly toward patient rooms. He was heading for room 312, where Mr. Henderson, a frail, sleeping elderly man, lay unaware. Maya knew she had no choice. Leo was about to enter a room with an innocent, vulnerable person. As he fumbled with the door handle, Maya moved. Not with a shout, but with a predatory silence. She emerged from the shadows, the four-pole held low. As Leo turned at the faint sound, she struck not at his head, but at the radial nerve cluster on his gun-wielding wrist. It was a precise, debilitating blow taught in close-quarters combat. A yelp of pain escaped him, his fingers spasming. The gun clattered to the linoleum, skittering away. Leo, enraged and startled, shoved the orderly aside and lunged at her, a switchblade snapping open in his other hand. The orderly scrambled away down the hall. The next 60 seconds were a silent, brutal ballet. Leo slashed wildly. Maya deflected with the pole, using its length to keep him at bay. He was strong and fueled by adrenaline and drugs, but she was efficient. She saw an opening as he overcommitted on a stab. Dropping low, she swept his legs out from under him with the pole. He crashed down hard, the wind knocked out of him. In an instant, she was on him, using a pressure point hold on his neck she hadn't employed in 15 years. He struggled, then went limp, unconscious. The silence that followed was louder than the struggle. Maya, breathing evenly, swiftly secured his hands with the cord from a nearby patient call button. She then retrieved the gun, cleared it with automatic movements, and placed it far down the hall. Only then did she kneel to check his pulse. Steady. She stood up, her nurse's scrubs rumpled, but her expression unreadable. The police, having heard the commotion, breached the floor seconds later, weapons drawn. They found a scene that defied explanation, an unconscious intruder neatly neutralized, a scared but unharmed orderly, and a night nurse standing calmly beside her subdued patient, as if she'd just taken his blood pressure. The lead officer, Sergeant Miller, looked from the knife on the floor to the four-pole in Maya's hand to her utterly placid face. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "what happened here?" Maya simply looked at him, the ghost of the ranger fading back behind her eyes. "He fell," she said, her voice quiet again. But the look exchanged between her and the sergeant said they both knew that was a lie. The immediate aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, statements, and stunned stares. Maya gave a terse, minimal account to the police, sticking to, "I acted on instinct to protect my patient." She mentioned her military background only when pressed, calling it non-combat medical training. Sergeant Miller didn't push. He'd seen the precision of the takedown. This was no lucky swing. News vans swarmed the hospital by morning. The story was irresistible. Hero nurse disarms armed man. The hospital administration, initially horrified, quickly saw the PR potential. They wanted Maya front and center for a press conference. She refused, repeatedly. Her quiet apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Reporters camped outside. Her phone rang incessantly with requests for interviews, talk shows, even a movie deal. Worse were the looks at the hospital. Her colleagues, who had known her as Steady Maya, now looked at her with a mix of awe and fear. Brenda, the head nurse, hugged her tightly but then asked in a whisper, "Who are you, Maya?" The question hung in the air. She was no longer just a nurse. She was an event. The intrusion wasn't just into the hospital. It was into the life she had so carefully built. The structured, predictable world where she controlled everything was gone. Vivid nightmares she hadn't had in years returned. Flashes of a dusty road in Iraq, the concussive roar of an IED, the screams that followed. She'd wake up sweating, her hands trembling. The calm focus she'd found in nursing was cracking, and the raw edges of her past were bleeding through. The breaking point came when a national tabloid ran a headline. Night Nightingale was Army's shadow angel. The article, full of speculation and unnamed sources, hinted at a classified special operations background. It was dangerously close to the truth. That same day, a plain manila envelope appeared in her mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single, grainy photograph of her younger self in fatigues, standing with her Ranger regiment. On the back, scrawled in pen, were the words, "Welcome back, Rodriguez. Your skills are still needed." A cold dread, deeper than any she'd felt facing Leo, settled in her gut. Her past hadn't just remembered her, it had found her. Someone from that old life knew where she was, and what she had done. The carefully buried identity of Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, a medic attached to a Ranger unit, was now clawing its way to the surface, threatening to destroy Nurse Maya completely. She burned the photo in her sink, watching the edges curl and blacken, but she couldn't burn away the message. The message in the envelope was a line in the sand. Maya knew the man from her past. The one she believed had sent it was a man named Kessler. He had been a contractor, a shadowy figure who moved between governments and private interests, always in need of unique talents. He was the reason she had left that life so completely, cutting all ties and fabricating a bland, civilian history. He represented a moral compromise she could no longer live with. She couldn't go to the police. Her own file was a hall of mirrors, half-truths, and redactions. Instead, She began her own quiet preparation. She moved out of her apartment, leaving no forwarding address, and rented a sparse room under a different name. She stopped going to her usual gym, instead running long, punishing routes through the city at different times. She bought a basic, untraceable pay-as-you-go phone. The nurse was receding, and the soldier was re-emerging, not out of pride, but necessity. Her fears were confirmed when she spotted a familiar face, a man named Shaw, who'd worked with Kessler, loitering near the hospital parking lot. It was no coincidence. They were scoping her, testing her awareness. Maya knew their playbook. They wouldn't snatch her off the street. They would apply pressure, force her to make a mistake, or create a scenario where she would have no choice but to come to them. The pressure came in a different, devastating form. One evening, as she was making a discreet visit to check on Mr. Henderson, the elderly patient from the night of the attack, she found his room empty. Brenda, her face pale, explained he'd taken a sudden, severe turn and had been moved to the ICU. The diagnosis was baffling: acute, unexplained organ distress. Maya, slipping back into her medic's mind, asked to see his blood work. The toxicology screen showed traces of a rare, fast-acting toxin, not something a frail old man would ever encounter accidentally. It was a signature, Kessler's signature. This wasn't a threat against her. It was a demonstration on someone she was sworn to protect. The message was clear: we can reach anyone around you. Your compassion is a lever we can pull. A furious, protective rage ignited within her. They had crossed a line from threatening her to harming an innocent under her care. The night nurse who wanted to hide was gone. Sergeant Rodriguez had a mission: stop Kessler and protect her patients. She used her old connections, the ones she'd sworn never to touch, sending coded messages through a veterans network. The reply was brief: Kessler was in town, brokering a deal for a new, undetectable bioagent. The meeting was set for tomorrow night at a decommissioned water treatment plant on the industrial outskirts of the city. It was a trap, she knew. They expected her to come. And she would, but not as they expected. The old water treatment plant was a cathedral of rust and shadows, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and decay. Maya approached not from the front, but through a maze of overflow tunnels, moving with a silence born of memory and purpose. She wore dark, practical clothing, her hair pulled tight. In her pocket was a multi-tool, a small but powerful flashlight, and a syringe loaded with a fast-acting sedative from the hospital. The tools of a healer turned to a different purpose. She scaled a corroded ladder to a gantry overlooking the vast central chamber. Below, illuminated by a single portable work light, stood Kessler. Older, grayer, but with the same predatory stillness. With him were two men, Shaw, and a nervous-looking scientist holding a small, sealed case, the bioagent. They were waiting. She'll come, Kessler said, his voice echoing. The nurse can't help herself. She sees a sick patient. She has to intervene. We've made the whole city her patient now. Maya let them wait. She observed their patterns, their watch points. Shaw was the muscle, alert but bored. The scientist was the weak link. She needed to separate them, to get to Kessler, and that case without a firefight. She created a diversion, using a small rock to clatter deep within the tunnel behind them. As Shaw went to investigate, Maya descended from the shadows, landing softly behind the scientist. A quick, precise pressure to his carotid artery, and he slumped silently. She caught the case before it hit the ground. Kessler turned, not with alarm, but with a faint smile. Sergeant Rodriguez, I knew the uniform didn't fit you. It fits me better than that suit fits you. Kessler, she said, her voice steady. The game's over. The toxin for Henderson. The antidote. Now. Shaw returned, gun drawn. Kessler held up a hand. You were always the best medic I had. But a medic needs an army. You're alone. He nodded to Shaw. What followed was not the chaotic struggle with Leo. This was a brutal, efficient dance of survival. Shaw was a professional. Maya used the environment, ducking behind pillars, using the case as a brief shield, feinting moves to create openings. She couldn't match his strength, but she could outthink him. She led him onto a section of the gantry weakened by rust. It groaned and gave way. Shaw fell, not far, but enough to break his leg with a sickening crunch. He was out of the fight. Maya turned to Kessler, who hadn't moved. He held up a small vial. The antidote. In exchange for the case. A trade. You walk away, and the old man lives. You can go back to playing nurse. She looked at the case in her hand, then at the vial. The deal he offered was the deal he always offered. A smaller evil to prevent a greater one. It was the choice that had broken her before. She saw Mr. Henderson's frail face. She saw the countless, faceless people this new pathogen could harm. "You're wrong, Kessler," she said. "A medic's job isn't to make deals with the enemy. It's to stop the bleeding at the source." In one fluid motion, she hurled the sealed case not at him, but into the deep, stagnant water of an old filtration tank. It sank instantly. Kessler's composure shattered. "You fool," he screamed. Maya was already moving. She closed the distance, not to fight, but to grab. As he swung at her, she caught his wrist, twisted, and, with a swift judo move, used his momentum to slam him against a concrete column. The vial flew from his hand. She dived, catching it just before it hit the ground. Kessler slumped, dazed. She stood over him, the precious vial clutched in her hand, the case with its nightmare cargo lost in the murky water forever. Sirens wailed in the distance. Her anonymous tip to the police had been timed perfectly. "The bleeding stops now," she said quietly, before melting back into the tunnels, leaving Kessler for the authorities and carrying the antidote back into the night, back toward her real duty.